Okay, let's start reading Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. We don't need the introduction bit. Let's start with the prologue. The night before he went to London, Richard Mayhew was not enjoying himself. He had begun the evening by enjoying himself. He had enjoyed reading all the goodbye cards and receiving the hugs from several not entirely unattractive young ladies of his acquaintance. He had enjoyed the warnings about the evils and dangers of London, and the gift of the white umbrella with the map of the London Underground on it that the lads had clubbed together to buy for him. He enjoyed the first few pints of ale, but then, with each successive pint of ale, he found he was enjoying himself significantly less, until now he was sitting and shivering on the pavement outside the pub in a small Scottish town, weighing the conflicting merits of being sick and not being sick, and not enjoying himself at all. Inside the pub, Richard's friends continued to celebrate his forthcoming departure with an enthusiasm that, to Richard's way of thinking, was beginning to border on the sinister. He sat on the pavement and held on tightly to the rolled up umbrella and wondered whether going south to London was really a good idea. "You want to keep an eye out," said a cracked old voice. "They'll be moving you on before you can say Jack Robinson. Or taking you in. I wouldn't be surprised." Two sharp eyes stared out from a beaky, grimy face. "You all right?" "Yes, thank you," said Richard. He was a fresh-faced, boyish young man with dark, slightly curly hair and large hazel eyes. He had a rumpled, just woken up look to him which made him more attractive to the opposite sex than he would ever understand or believe. The grimy face softened. "Here, poor thing," she said, and pushed a 50-pence piece into Richard's hand. "How long you been on the streets, then?" "I'm not homeless," explained Richard, embarrassed, attempting to give the old woman her coin back. "Please, take your money, I'm fine. I just came out here to get some air. I go to London tomorrow," he explained. She peered down at him suspiciously, then took back her 50-pence and made it vanish beneath the layers of coats and shawls in which she was enveloped. "I've been to London," she confided. "I was married in London, but he was a bad lot. Me mum told me not to go marrying outside, but I was young and beautiful, although you'd never credit it today, and I followed my heart." "I'm sure you did," said Richard, embarrassed. The conviction that he was about to be sick was starting slowly to fade. "Fat lot of good it done me. I've been homeless, so I know what it's like," said the old woman. "That's why I thought you was." "What you going to London for?" "I've got a job," he told her proudly. "Doing what?" she asked. Securities," said Richard. "I was a dancer," said the old woman, and she tottered awkwardly around the pavement, humming tunelessly to herself. Then she teetered from side to side like a spinning top coming to a rest. And finally she stopped, facing Richard. "Hold out your hand," she told him, "and I'll tell your fortune." He did as he was told. She put her old hand into his and held it tightly, and then she blinked a few times, like an owl who had swallowed a mouse that was beginning to disagree with it. "You got a long way to go," she said, puzzled. "London," Richard told her. "Not just London," the old woman paused. "Not any London I know." It started to rain, then, softly. "I'm sorry," she said. "It starts with doors." "Doors?" She nodded. The rain fell harder, pattering on the roofs and on the asphalt of the road. "I'd watch out for doors if I were you." Richard stood up, a little unsteadily. "All right," he said, a little unsure of how one ought to treat information of this nature. "I will, thanks." The pub door was opened, and light and noise spilled out into the street. "Richard, you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I'll be back in a second." The old lady was already wobbling down the street into the pelting rain, getting wet. Richard felt he had to do something for her. He couldn't give her money, though. He hurried after her down the narrow street, the cold rain drenching his face and hair. "Here," said Richard. He fumbled with the handle of the umbrella, trying to find the button that opened it. Then a click, and it blossomed into a huge white map of the London Underground network, each line drawn in a different colour, every station marked and named. The old woman took the umbrella gratefully and smiled her thanks. "You've a good heart," she told him. "Sometimes that's enough to see you safe wherever you go." Then she shook her head. "But mostly it's not." She clutched the umbrella tightly as a gust of wind threatened to tug it away from her or pull it inside out. She wrapped her arms around it and bent almost double against the rain and the wind. Then she walked away into the rain and the night, a round white shape covered with the names of the London tube stations: Earl's Court, Marble Arch, Blackfriars, White City, Victoria Angel, Oxford Circus. Richard found himself pondering drunkenly whether there really was a circus at Oxford Circus, a real circus with clowns and beautiful women and dangerous beasts. The pub door opened once more, a blast of sound as if the pub's volume control had just been turned up high. "Richard, you wanker! It's your bloody party and you're missing all the fun." He walked back in the pub, the urge to be sick lost in all the oddness. "You look like a drowned rat," said someone. "You've never seen a drowned rat," said Richard. Someone else handed him a large whiskey. "Here, get that down ya. That'll warm you up. You know you won't be able to get real Scotch in London." "I'm sure I will," sighed Richard. Water was dripping from his hair into his drink. "They have everything in London." And he downed the Scotch. And after that, someone brought him another. And then the evening blurred and broke up into fragments. And afterwards he remembered only the sense that he was leaving somewhere small and sensible that made sense for somewhere large and old that didn't, and vomiting interminably into a gutter flowing with rainwater somewhere in the small hours of the morning, and a white shape marked with strange coloured symbols, like a little round beetle walking away from him in the rain. The next morning Richard got to the train to London for the 6-hour journey south that would bring him to the strange Gothic spires and arches of St. Pancras Station. His mother gave him a small walnut cake that she made for the journey and a thermos flask filled with tea. And Richard Mayhew went to London feeling like hell. Chapter 1. She had been running for 4 days now, a harum-scarum tumbling flight through passages and tunnels. She was hungry and exhausted and more tired than a body could stand, and each successive door was proving harder to open. After 4 days of flight, she had found a hiding place, a tiny stone burrow under the world where she would be safe, or so she prayed, and at last she slept. Mr. Coop had hired Ross at the floating market, which had been held in Westminster Abbey. "Think of him," he told Mr. Vandermeer, "as a canary." "Sings?" said Mr. Vandermeer. "I doubt it. I sincerely and utterly doubt it." Mr. Coop ran a hand through his lank orange hair. "No, my fine friend, I was thinking metaphorically, more along the lines of the birds they take down the mines." Mr. Vandermeer nodded, comprehension dawning slowly. "Yes, a canary." Mr. Ross had no resemblance to a canary. He was huge, almost as big as Mr. Vandermeer, and extremely grubby and quite hairless. And he said very little, although he had made a point of telling each of them that he liked to kill things, and he was good at it. And this amused Mr. Coop and Mr. Vandermeer, much as Genghis Khan might have been amused by the swagger of a young Mongol who had recently pillaged his first village or burnt his first yacht. He burnt his first yurt. He was a canary and he never knew it. So Mr. Ross went first. In his filthy t-shirt and his crusted blue jeans, and Croup and Vandermeer walked behind him in their elegant black suits. There were 4 simple ways for the observant to tell Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandermeer apart. First, Mr. Vandermeer is 2.5 heads taller than Mr. Croup. Second, Mr. Croup had eyes of faded china blue, while Mr. Vandermeer's eyes are brown. Third, while Mr. Vandermeer fashioned the rings he wears on his right hand out of the skulls of 4 ravens, Mr. Croup had no obvious jewellery. Fourth, Mr. Croup likes words, while Mr. Vandermeer is always hungry. Also, they look nothing at all alike. A rustle in the tunnel darkness. Mr. Vandermeer's knife was in his hand, and then it was no longer in his hand, and it was quivering gently, almost 30 feet away. He walked over to his knife and picked it up by the hilt. There was a grey rat impaled on the blade, its mouth opening and closing impotently as the life fled. He crushed its skull between finger and thumb. "Now there's one rat that won't be telling any more tales," said Mr. Croup, and he chuckled at his own joke. Mr. Vandermeer did not respond. "Rat, tails, get it?" Mr. Vandermeer pulled the rat from the blade and began to munch on it, thoughtfully, head first. Mr. Croup slapped it out of his hands. "Stop that," he said, and Mr. Vandermeer put his knife away, a little sullenly. "Buck up," hissed Mr. Croup, encouragingly. "There will always be another rat. Now, onward. Things to do, people to damage." 3 years in London had not changed Richard, although it had changed the way he perceived the city. Richard had originally imagined London as a grey city, even a black city, from the pictures he had seen, and he was surprised to find it filled with colour. It was a city of red brick and white stone, red buses and large black taxis, which were often, to Richard's initial puzzlement, gold or green or maroon. It was a city in which the very old and the awkwardly new jostled each other, not uncomfortably, but without respect. A city of shops and offices and restaurants and homes, of parks and churches, of ignored monuments and remarkably unpalatial palaces. A city of hundreds of districts with strange names: Crouch End, Chalk Farm, Earl's Court, Marble Arch, and oddly distinct identities. A noisy, dirty, cheerful, troubled city, which fed on tourists, needed them as it despised them, in which the average speed of transportation through the city had not increased in 300 years, following 500 years of fitful road widening and unskillful compromises between the needs of traffic, whether horse-drawn or more recently motorised, and the needs of pedestrians. A city inhabited by and teeming with people of every colour and manner and kind. When he had first arrived, he had found London huge, odd, fundamentally incomprehensible, with only the tube map, that elegant multicoloured topographical display of underground railway lines and stations, giving it any semblance of order. Gradually, he realised that the tube map was a handy fiction that made life easier, but bore no resemblance to the reality of the shape of the city above. Like belonging to a political party, he thought once, proudly, and then, having tried to explain the resemblance between the tube map and politics at a party to a cluster of bewildered strangers, he had decided in the future to leave political comment to others. He continued, slowly by a process of osmosis and white knowledge, which is like white noise, only more informative, to comprehend the city. A process which accelerated when he realised that the actual city of London itself was no bigger than a square mile, stretching from Aldgate in the east to Fleet Street and the law courts of the Old Bailey in the west. A tiny municipality now home to London's financial institutions, and that was where it had all begun. 2,000 years before, London had been a little Celtic village on the north shore of the Thames, which the Romans had encountered and settled in. London had grown slowly until, roughly 1,000 years later, it met the tiny royal city of Westminster immediately to the west, and once London Bridge had been built, London met the town of Southwark directly across the river, and it continued to grow. fields and woods and marshlands slowly vanishing beneath the flourishing town, and it continued to expand, encountering other little villages and hamlets as it grew, like Whitechapel and Deptford to the east, Hammersmith and Shepherd's Bush to the west, Camden and Islington in the north, Battersea and Lambeth across the Thames to the south, absorbing all of them as it grew, just as a pool of mercury encounters and incorporates smaller beads of mercury, leaving only their names behind. London grew into something huge and contradictory. It was a good place and a fine city, but there is a price to be paid for all good places, and a price that all good places have to pay. After a while, Richard found himself taking London for granted. In time, he began to pride himself on having visited none of the sights of London, except for the Tower of London, when his Aunt Maud came down to the city for a weekend and Richard found himself her reluctant escort. But Jessica changed all that. Richard found himself on otherwise sensible weekends accompanying her to places like the National Gallery and the Tate Gallery, where he learned that walking around museums too long hurts your feet and that the great art treasures of the world all blur into each other after a while, and that it is almost beyond the human capacity for belief to accept how much museum cafeterias will brazenly charge for a slice of cake and a cup of tea. "Here's your tea and your eclair," he told her. "It would have cost less to buy one of these at Tintoretto's." "Don't exaggerate," said Jessica cheerfully. "Anyway, there aren't any Tintorettos at the Tate." "I should have had that cherry cake," said Richard. "Then they would have been able to afford another Van Gogh." "No," said Jessica accurately, "they wouldn't." Richard had met Jessica in France on a weekend break in Paris 2 years earlier, had in fact discovered her in the Louvre while trying to find the group of his office friends who had organised the trip. Staring up at an immense sculpture, he had stepped backwards into Jessica, who was admiring an extremely large and historically important diamond. He tried to apologise to her in French, which he did not speak, and so gave up, and began to apologise in English, and then tried to attempt to apologise in French for his having to apologise in English, until he noticed that Jessica was about as English as it was possible for any one person to be, by which time she had him buy her an expensive French sandwich and some overpriced fizzy apple juice by way of an apology. And well, that was the start of it all, really. He had never been able to convince Jessica that he wasn't the kind of person who went to art galleries after that. On weekends, they did not go to art galleries or to museums. Richard would trail behind Jessica as she went shopping, which she did, on the whole, in Knightsbridge, a short walk and an even shorter taxi ride from her flat in Kensington Mews. Richard would accompany Jessica on her tours of such huge and intimidating emporia as Harrods and Harvey Nichols, department stores where Jessica was able to purchase anything from jewellery to books to the week's groceries. Richard had been awed by Jessica, who was beautiful and often quite funny and was certainly going somewhere, and Jessica saw in Richard an enormous amount of potential, which, properly harnessed by the right woman, would have made him the perfect matrimonial accessory, if only he were a little more focused, she would murmur to herself, and so she gave him books with titles like Dress for Success and 125 Habits of Successful Men, and books on how to run a business like a military campaign, and Richard always said thank you and always meant to read them. In Harvey Nichols' men's fashion department, she would pick out for him the kinds of clothes she thought that he should wear, and he wore them during the week anyway, and a year to the day after their first encounter, she told him she thought it time that they went shopping for an engagement ring. "Why do you go out with her?" asked Gary in corporate accounts 18 months after that. "She's terrifying." Richard shook his head. "She's really sweet once you get to know her." Gary put down the plastic troll he had picked up from Richard's desk. "I'm surprised she still lets you play with these." "The subject has never come up," said Richard, picking up one of the creatures from his desk. It had a shock of day-glow orange hair and a slightly baffled expression, as if it were lost. The subject had indeed come up. Jessica had, however, convinced herself that Richard's troll collection was a mark of endearing eccentricity comparable to Mr. Stockton's collection of angels. Jessica was in the process of organising a travelling exhibition of Mr. Stockton's angel collection and had come to the conclusion that great men always collected something. In actuality, Richard did not really collect trolls. He had found a troll on the street outside the office, and in a vague and pretty vain attempt at injecting a little personality into his working world, he had placed it on his computer monitor. The others had followed over the next few months, gifts from colleagues who had noticed that Richard had a penchant for the ugly little creatures. He had taken the gifts and positioned them strategically about his desk, beside the telephones and the framed photographs of Jessica. Today, the photograph had a yellow post-it note stuck to it. It was Friday afternoon. Richard had noticed that events were cowards. They didn't occur singly, but instead they would run in packs and leap out at him all at once. Take this particular Friday, for example. It was, as Jessica had pointed out to him at least a dozen times in the last month, the most important day of his life. Not the most important day of her life, of course. That would come one day in the future when Richard had no doubt they would make her Prime Minister, or Queen, or God. But it was, without question, the most important day of his life. So it was unfortunate that, despite the post-it note Richard had left on his fridge door at home and the other post-it note he had placed on the photograph of Jessica on his desk, he had forgotten about it completely and utterly. Also, there was the Wandsworth report, which was overdue and taking up most of his head. Richard checked another row of figures. Then he noticed that page 17 had vanished, and he set it up to print out again, and another page down, and he knew that if he were only left alone to finish it, if miracles of miracles, the phone did not ring, it rang. He thumbed at the speakerphone. "Hello, Richard? The managing director needs to know when you'll have the report." Richard looked at his watch. 5 minutes, Sylvia. It's almost wrapped up. I just have to attach the P&L projection. Thanks. Dick will come down for it. Sylvia was, as she liked to explain, the MD's PA, and she moved in an atmosphere of crisp efficiency. He thumbed the speakerphone off. It rang again immediately. "Richard," said the speaker with Jessica's voice. "It's Jessica. You haven't forgotten, have you?" Forgotten? He tried to remember what he could have forgotten. He looked at Jessica's photograph for inspiration and found all the inspiration he could have needed in the shape of a yellow post-it note stuck onto her forehead. "Richard, pick up the phone." He picked up the phone, reading the post-it note as he did so. "Sorry, Jess. No, I hadn't forgotten. 7 p.m. at Ma Maison Italiano. Should I meet you there?" "Jessica. Richard. Not Jess." She paused for a moment. "After what happened last time, I don't think so. You really could get lost in your own back garden, Richard." Richard contemplated pointing out that anyone could have confused the National Gallery with the National Portrait Gallery, and that it wasn't she who had spent the whole day standing in the rain, which was, in his opinion, every bit as much fun as walking around either place until his feet hurt. But he thought better of it. "I'll meet you at your place," said Jessica. "We can walk down together." "Right, Jessica, sorry. You have confirmed our reservation, haven't you, Richard?" "Yes," lied Richard earnestly. The other phone on his desk had begun to ring, shrilly. "Jessica, look, Good," said Jessica, and she broke the connection. The largest amount of money Richard had ever spent on anything had been spent on Jessica's engagement ring 18 months earlier at one of Harrod's many jewellery concessions. He picked up the other phone. "Hi, Dick," said Gary. "It's me, Gary." Gary sat a few desks down from Richard. He waved at Richard from his own gleamingly troll-free desk. "Are we still on for drinks? You said we could go over the Mirthsome account." "Get off the bloody phone, Gary. Of course we are." Richard put down the phone. There was a telephone number at the bottom of the post-it note. Richard had written the post-it note to himself several weeks earlier, and he had made the reservation. He was almost certain of that, but he had not confirmed it. He had kept meaning to, but there had been so much to do, and Richard had known there was plenty of time. But events run in packs. Sylvia was now standing next to him. "Dick, the Wandsworth report. Almost ready, Sylvia. Can you just hold on a sec? Can you?" He finished punching in the number, breathed a sigh of relief, when somebody answered. "Marmasson, can I help you?" "Yes," said Richard, "a table for 3 tonight. I think I booked it, and if I did, I'm confirming the reservation, and if I didn't, I wondered if I could book it, please." No, they had no record of a table for tonight in the name of Mayhew, or Stockton, or Bartram, Jessica's surname. And as for booking a table, it wasn't the words that Richard found so unpleasant, it was the tone of voice in which the information was transmitted. A table for tonight should certainly have been booked 3 years before, perhaps, it was implied, by Richard's parents. A table for tonight was impossible. If the Pope, the Prime Minister, and the President of France arrived this evening without a confirmed reservation, even they would be turned out into the street with a continental jeer. "But it's for my fiancé's boss. I know I should have phoned before. There are only 3 of us. Can't you please—" They had to put down the phone. "Richard," said Sylvia, "the MD's waiting." "Do you think," asked Richard, "they'd give me a table if I phoned back and offered them extra money?"